Welcome to the Raised with Jesus podcast, 10 minutes every day with life where Jesus meets yours. You've got your daily Bible reading for June 21st, 2019, looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 7, beginning in verse 17. Paul writes, "However, each person is to live in the situation God assigned to him, the situation he was in when God called him to faith. I give this same command in all the churches. If a man was circumcised when he was called, he should not become uncircumcised. If a man was uncircumcised when he was called, he should not get circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but keeping God's commands is important. Let each person stay in the calling in which he was called. Were you a slave when you were called? Do not let it bother you. But if you are able to become free, take advantage of it. For the slave who is called to be in the Lord is the Lord's freed person. Likewise, the free person who is called is Christ's slave. You are bought at a price. Do not become slaves of men. Brothers, let each person remain before God in the situation he was in when he was called. Now concerning virgins, I have no command from the Lord, but I give my judgment as one whom the Lord in his mercy made worthy of trust. Accordingly, I think this is good, because of the difficult situation we face, namely, that it is good for a person to remain as he is. Are you bound to a wife? Do not seek to be freed. Are you unattached? Do not seek a wife. But if you do get married, you have not sinned, and if a virgin gets married, she has not sinned. Yet such people will be under pressure in their earthly lives, and I am trying to spare you." Here concludes our reading for today. We'll begin in verse 29 next week, and that will finish out the chapter for us. But in this portion today, the main idea that Paul is talking about is that when you get married, you have a responsibility given to you by God for the other person and toward the other person. And life in a sinful world is difficult. And so the Christian who is considering marriage or considering not marrying, the Christian first has to consider and focus their eyes on what God has given them to do already, which is be a Christian and remain in the faith and live as a Christian. And then also consider the difficulties that may come to pass. Paul's primary note here is that for the married couple, there will be extra considerations and there will be the devotion toward the spouse as well as the devotion toward the Lord. And Paul says, well, there's going to be difficult times coming. There's going to be persecution coming. There's going to be extra stress and coming, and you need to be prudent when you talk about marriage and when you think about marriage. Not that marriage itself is bad, or it definitely is a blessing from God, but Paul is saying you need to consider it carefully, not just launch into it. And you don't just enter marriage because you think you have to, or that you're under some external compulsion. By no means. Marriage is a free choice, and a person enters into marriage knowing themselves first. Where Paul had said earlier, talking about it is better to marry than to burn with passion, and he himself was single, but that doesn't mean that everybody has to be single. But for he who is single, he was able to travel a lot more and to undergo all sorts of intense persecution and put himself in harm's way in preaching the gospel that he wouldn't have done that if you were married. And so he really says to Christians, he says that remember, your life is not one of being pushed all around to and fro by your emotions as though you're some boat on a stormy sea. Rather, you are to think about your life and plan for your life accordingly. And if you enter into marriage, then enter into it with the eyes wide open. The fact that you are now committing yourself to this person, to this spouse, to love them and live with them no matter what. And that is a difficult thing to do in a world of sin. And you just have to recognize that it is a blessing from God, but you need to consider it carefully. And then he kind of goes on in verse 17 and following, that you don't feel like you have to change your circumstances once you become a Christian. You simply serve God from where you are. This is the broad topic of Christian vocation. which is like the different hats that we wear, the different responsibilities that God has given to us in life, as a husband or wife, as a child or as a parent, as an employer, employee, all those different hats that we wear, usually many of them at once. Paul says, don't try to change your circumstances as though you have to change something about your life once you become a Christian, which is, again, going back to their opening question, their opening accusation in verse 1, where you had the liberal, the license side of the church, the license faction, saying, hey, it's good for us to do any and every sin, and aren't we ought to be proud and forthright about this man who's sleeping with his stepmother. And the more conservative ended up going into legalism side, saying, all sexual activity is bad. And Paul kind of corrected all that already to say sexual activity is good within a marriage relationship between one man and one woman committed to each other publicly for life. That's what marriage is. But then he goes on to say, don't think that you have to change your circumstances. If you're married to a believer or an unbeliever, don't change that marriage. Just live out your marriage the way it ought to be. When he talks about the position in life, such as circumcision, uncircumcision, slavery, freedom, remember that your primary defining characteristic is your Christianity. That's really the main point in all of this, that your primary defining characteristic is your Christianity, and your Christianity influences how you do everything else in life, how you live as a single person, or how you live as a spouse, how you live as an employer or employee, how you live and act as a parent or child. And then the other vocations that we may take on, such as becoming married and maybe becoming a parent at some time after that, the other vocations that we take are somewhat subservient to that. And so Paul that's really the idea that he's working with here, is that your primary devotion is to your Lord, and your secondary devotion in all the other vocations of life is to serve the Lord in those vocations by living as best as you can in each of those vocations. You don't have to change your circumstances in order to serve the Lord, although you are free to do so. So if you are a single person, then you serve the Lord as a single person, and you are wholeheartedly, single-mindedly devoted to serving the Lord. If you are somebody who apparently doesn't have the same sort of gift for singleness that Paul did, and you found yourself burning with passion, well, then get married and serve your spouse as you serve the Lord, and serve the Lord by serving your spouse. And if you're somebody who was uncircumcised, the Gentile Christian before you became a Christian, Paul says you don't have to be circumcised in order to be a Christian. It's not a condition of faith at all. Just serve the Lord as you are. And there are certain blessings and difficulties that come with each status or each vocation that one may carry, or each characteristic. If you're somebody who was already circumcised, a Jewish believer, a Jewish convert, then don't live and become as one who is uncircumcised. Just serve the Lord in the specific characteristics and area of life that God has given to you there. And to see the different vocations in life as blessings from God, that the people in your life are not people standing in the way of your Christian faith. Oftentimes we can kind of blame that way, right? If only, he did this or she did that, and only if my employer were one of these and not like that. Paul says, no matter where you are, see it as God's gift to you, and look to serve the Lord in whatever area that may be. And there may be some choices that are better than others. When he talks about verse 21, were you a slave? If you are able to become free, take advantage of it. But you don't have to be. Don't let it bother you if you're a slave. Or in that case, like a contract worker who would contract yourself to an employer for 5 years or 10 years or something like that. If you like your job as a Christian today, then by all means work there. But remember that your primary and your first devotion is to the Lord. And then you serve the Lord by serving well in your current vocation. And I guess that's kind of the big idea here. Paul says you don't have to change your circumstances in order to serve the Lord. And you don't have to deprive yourself of the blessings that come with each different vocation, and you don't have to take on a new vocation because in order to be a Christian, because that may bring with it another set of responsibilities and another set of difficulties or challenges. Rather, his main one point in this section, it took me like 10 minutes to get around to that. His main one point in this section is to serve the Lord where you are. Devote yourself primarily to the Lord, and then look at the vocations that you have, whether as a spouse or a single person, widow or widower, employer, employee, slave, somebody from a Gentile background or a Jewish background, whatever it may be. Look at all of those areas of life, all of those vocations, all of those characteristics that you carry as opportunities to serve the Lord. And understanding that, it's not a grass is greener syndrome. Well, if only I were this, then it would be easier. Because if you change your vocation, talking about circumcised becoming uncircumcised, or somebody who's seeking out a spouse because they thought they had to be married, Paul says, if you're looking at the other side of the fence and you think that the grass is greener over there, or that it will be easier for you or better for you as a Christian, he says, stop thinking that way, because then you're missing out on the opportunity to serve the Lord that you have right now in front of you. So as you go about your day, think of the different hats that you wear, the different characteristics, family background, people that you're related to, people that you know, place that you live, all the stuff that really kind of describes you. And think of how you might serve God in that area today. You can find us Sunday morning at 2250 South Holland, Sylvania Road in Maumee, 9 a.m. on Sunday mornings, also 7 p.m. Wednesday evenings, or follow us on Facebook. Just search for Resurrection Maumee. And probably here in the end of June or beginning July, we'll have our own Resurrection Facebook group, because Facebook updated their algorithm to really show a distinct preference for video and a distinct preference for groups as opposed to pages. So we're gonna have a group for our church, and then hopefully we can have some interaction there as well. So keep an eye out for that. God bless your day.